My name is Scott Propp. I'm with the Minneapolis PDMA group, and I have the privilege of introducing John this afternoon. John's going to bring us a presentation called the Top 40 Checkup for Product Management. John's a principal of Market View Consulting and has had 25 years of real-world experience running product management, marketing, corporate strategy, and partner development for startups all the way through established technology companies. As a result, his perspectives combine the entrepreneurial innovation of startups with process and scalability of large enterprises, with a constant eye towards blending the best of both for growth and profitability and increase in value. He's had the opportunity to manage all aspects of product life cycles, marketing, and distribution for both cutting-edge and established product lines with P&Ls ranging from $5 to $200 million. His firm helps manage technology-enabled companies with solutions to fill strategic and technical gaps in product management. And we would like to just extend a warm welcome to John and thank him for the presentation this afternoon. I will be watching the chat and would be happy to interact with any of the attendees there. We'll be holding the questions till the end of the presentation, unless there's something that we'll bring forward right away. So looking forward to the presentation. John, let me hand it over to you.
All right, thanks. Good. Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate that. And thanks everybody for joining today. I think I'll just jump in with a story, and I think it'll lead into why it is I chose the topic that I did today. I've been a product manager really inside of technology companies for most of my career, really. And I was at Thomson Reuters at the time, and we had just finished a multi-month process of launching a new platform product. And my product management team, I had a product manager and product marketing manager and some other people. We had been working very, very hard, and the launch was successful. But I have to be honest, I felt like when I was working with the different cross-functional groups, so sales and support and professional services and what have you, I felt like we were kind of pulling teeth. But we got it done, and like product managers do, and we go forward. And then after the launch, about a few days after the launch, I got a phone call from the vice president of the support department. And she was a person who I respected and trusted. And she asked me something that just kind of floored me. She said, John, now that the launch is over, I'm kind of shorthanded over here in my support department. And would you mind if I borrowed your product manager for about a week, and then maybe some part-time after that, because since the launch is done, I assumed that you guys had a lot of extra time. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my word, we had so much we had to get done for the future releases and all the market research, et cetera, for product design and development, et cetera. We were actually really behind because of the launch. So, and then I thought to myself, well, she's not rude, so what's going on? And then I picked up the phone and I asked a few other people. I said, what do you think product management does? And actually, I got answers all over the board. I was stunned as to how many people really didn't know what it is that we did. And so then I came to the realization that really I had to do a much better job of communicating what we do so that I could in turn get the support of the vice presidents of those departments so that we in turn could have them help me more in the product management area to get things done. So what I want to talk about today is really how do you go about actually getting this kind of awareness with the other team members? And to do that, the first thing you have to understand is what are the key elements of the product management best practices? And then beyond that, what's the most important to the company? What's the current coverage? Do we have people actually assigned to do these things? And if not, what are the gaps? How are we going to fill them? And, most importantly, who's responsible and what do they need from others? So I've been a fan of pragmatic marketing for a very long time, and I put together a framework on my own, really blending that together with other methodologies that I've used in the different companies I've been in to suit what I think works really well. I've taken a slightly more granular approach because I found it much more helpful when it comes to actually organizing large cross-functional teams and deciding who's going to do what and when. So what I want to do now is there's not time to take you through the detail of each of these. Really, each of these sections could be a presentation by itself. But I'm going to hit the highlights and then jump into the meat of how you get people on board. So let me start with market IQ. Really, this is a market intelligence. Fundamental to be a market-driven company and a market-driven product management team is to make sure your team actually understands the market and customers and what their problems are. So typically, I'll start with just a quick knowledge gap analysis and figure out, other than them just doing some Google searches now and then, what's an actual list of things that we really need to know on a continuous basis. And usually the first thing we'll do is turn that into a win-loss call process so that our product managers are always talking to customers that we won and lost. And then armed with that information plus other information, we start really understanding the problems that our customers are experiencing, especially the ones that are pervasive and impactful, such that they will pay us to solve them as opposed to nice to have. And then taking that information of the knowledge of the problems and taking a look at the competition and figuring out how are we going to differentiate ourselves. So that was about a 60-second description of something that should have taken about an hour, but that's market intelligence. So then I talk about the what I call the targeting section. And so really the question we want to answer there is, who is our target and what do they care about? And most of you in this audience, I know that this is not new to any of you, but turns out that, at least in my experience, a lot of companies don't spend a lot of time really thinking about this as much as they probably should. So aside from choosing a target market or markets, whatever the case may be, then really taking some time to understand which segments within that target market are you really targeting. And I would add to that, deciding which ones you're not targeting. In fact, that's probably even more helpful in some ways. And then armed with the segmentation information, you've understood the problem, you've got the markets selected, you've got the segmentation shows, and then creating user personas that really illustrate both the users and the buyers, what they're like when you're trying to build and sell your product. Now that's helpful for the product management team, but what I found is it's even more helpful for the whole cross-functional team, because it becomes a rallying point to really understand the customer, and then you become a portal to share that information with others. On the business end, once we have an understanding of the key problems to solve and we know who we're targeting, now comes time to figure out, well, if we solve this problem and bring it to market, does it fit our strategy and does it make business sense? So for example, got to take a look at the channel strategy, the portfolio strategy. For example, if the product line that you're actually working on at the moment is being sunset in 3 years, you're probably not going to spend a lot of money in innovation there. For example, here, let me go backward. Or the strategy alignment with how the corporate is seeing growth. How do they want to grow the company? So once that's aligned, then you really got to take a look at what's the technical feasibility and what's the cost to get it built, and then how much can we charge for it, and what's the revenue that's going to be associated, and then end up with a profit and risk analysis. So the whole idea here is you really want to make sure that you spend a lot of time here before you start spending real development dollars on the product. And again, I know that this is pretty basic for a lot of you who know product management. For those of you who don't, my hope is that this will be helpful. On the product side, so now that we've said that we can justify building the product, there's a couple of different things that you need to, not a couple, a long list of things you got to do for the product, but probably the most important thing to start with, in my opinion, is value proposition. And what I've learned is that if you don't have a very succinct value proposition and elevator's pitch for the product in advance, those problems are going to ripple through all the way through, up from the beginning until the end. So assuming that that's nailed down, then you need to maybe take some time before you start spending real development dollars again to validate those problems with some market data or some market research, and then also validate the concepts that you come up with to try to solve those problems. And again, we're trying to go in skinny and not take too much time before we start spending real dollars. And then once you feel comfortable that you've got the right problems that you're going to solve and you've got the right concepts, then you need to develop a full-on roadmap. And in that roadmap, probably the most important thing, aside from making sure it fits the strategy, is to have a prioritization process so that you're using both subjective and objective information to make the decision about what gets built and what doesn't. At least in my experience as a consultant, and also when I was doing product management, typically the way that the things got decided as to what to build was really not good. There's maybe 3 or 4 people who just had some ideas as opposed to a real process behind it. Once the roadmap's done, then you've got to create the marketing requirements, which of course are really fundamental to the next parts of the process.
John, I'm
So,
noticing that the slides appear to be behind where you're speaking. I don't know if there's a refresh you can do on your side, but we're a little behind where you are.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay, do you see some red boxes right now?
Actually, I think we're on slide number 2, as near as I can tell.
Oh my word. Do you see a slide that has a blue arrows going to the right diagonally and then some red boxes?
No, we are not seeing that slide. So I don't know if you can do a screen refresh or something to get that one.
Yeah, let me try that. Okay. I think what I'm going to do, Steve, is I'm going to stop sharing and I'll start sharing again with my whole desktop and see if that helps.
That
okay?
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, thank you. Just give me 1 second. All right, are you seeing it now?
Waiting for the refresh. It should be coming.
Okay. Nothing yet?
Nothing yet, John.
Well, just give me a few more moments here to see how I
was going to say,
can.
you might want to pull out of sharing, go to the slide, and
that.
then reshare just that slide.
Yeah. All right, so I'm not sharing it now. We'll go back to sharing. Let's try, what's that?
I'm sorry for the feedback. I was just opening a participant window and it cross-talked for a moment.
Yeah, are you seeing my screen now?
Yeah. Unfortunately, no. So what I would do is just continue your program in audio, and we'll perhaps share the slides with the participants at the close or something.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to. That's really unfortunate because this is really a contingent on seeing the actual frameworks.
Yeah, for the participants, there's a very significant amount of data that John has assembled for us. It's unfortunate that the technology is not responding.
Yeah. Well, let me go ahead and just launch this file one more time. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just kind of continue on here. Just bear with me here. Okay. What's that?
Just a little crosstalk, John.
Okay, good. All right. Any luck now?
No, actually not.
Okay. Well, I'm going to just continue on.
Why don't you unshare, John, and let me see if I can share from my side.
Yeah, that'd be good. And in the meantime, I'll just go ahead and start kind of going on because I'll run out of time otherwise. Right. So what I was trying to show, and sorry for all technical problems, we really did test it. But imagine if you're familiar with the pragmatic marketing framework, imagine that framework is a grid of all the different kind of functions of product management, and each area has a certain group of activity of market intelligence, targeting, doing business cases, planning the product, and actually planning for launch. And what I was doing is I was describing each section. And so on the planning side, after you've got the product plan, you've got requirements written and that sort of thing, and now it's time to really engage the cross-functional team to get the marketing plan together, the launch plan together, and then to establish kind of a cadence of cross-functional alignment, so that on a continuous basis you're meeting with each of the representatives from each of those departments to plan the launch, so that when you get to the end and you're ready to launch the product and go to market, everybody has got their role to play and they understand what to do to complete the entire customer experience. So that's the planning section, and then along with that, of course, is the sales process. You have to work closely with sales to figure out exactly how to sell the product and what the value proposition is. And then the next section is called go to market, and that is beyond just a launch. It's really just holistically, how do you raise awareness of your product, interest in your product? How do you help people who are interested then make a decision for your product, and then take an action to actually buy it? And so, as you can imagine, there's a whole range of activities there, really starting with all the tools and processes sales needs, or we have to have collateral. You've got to do some channel training, and lead generation, references, all the things one would do with product marketing. And then following that, there's this issue of deciding up front how you're going to actually support the go-to-market activity. And this one's important because it consists of things like high-stakes calls. For example, sales is always going to want the product manager to come in and take part in certain customer calls, or do presentations. Maybe they want them to attend a trade show. The product manager is a product expert, but if you're not careful, that will end up consuming them when you're actually going to market, and they won't be able to do all the other things that they do. So that's the framework, which again is very difficult to show you without actually seeing it. But I'll continue on here. So imagine, if you will, now you've got that you've got a grid of all the different kind of activities. And the question is, how do you actually then go about getting people on board for, what their role is going to be in the product management process? And so, generally speaking, what I found is if there's any uncertainty about who does what in any part of this process, the natural assumption is going to be that product management is solely responsible for that activity. And the challenge, of course, is that it's really unscalable. The product manager needs to be leading the effort and getting people on the same page, but each person in the team needs to have some level of accountability for their part of the world. So if you're familiar with the RACI model, for every one of these boxes, there needs to be somebody responsible, somebody accountable, and then identify who's going to be consulted and who's going to be just informed. So question is, how do you actually go about making that happen? And I don't see your screen just yet, Scott. It must not be working, huh?
Yeah, no, it's not.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess there's comfort in happening to both of us at the same time, right? So the way that I go about it, I call it either a one-step or two-step process. And this is just from practical experience. And after I told you that story about what happened to Thomson Reuters. After that happened, what I did is I called a meeting and I asked for all the leaders of those departments, and then we invite some of their managers as well, to sit down. And I wanted to take them through what product management actually does. And so the first question you need to get people on the same page on is, what are these things? And so I show the grid in front of the room and actually go through a summary of each of those items. But while you're doing that, what you can't see on the screen right now is there's actually a template I created just to make this easier, such that you take these one at a time and you ask the group, for us to be successful as a company, is this very important? Is it moderately important? Is it low importance? Is it not important at all? How much should we be worrying about this particular activity? And the reason this is so important is that in product management, what I found is that usually you don't have resources to do all this well, really at all. So you've got to pick your battles. And so this is a way to get everybody on the same page to say, yes, we're going to focus here. We're not going to focus there. And so you don't have any question. And then the second question then is, well, of that, what's the coverage? And so what you don't see on your screen is a template that actually allows you to track that as you go as well. So is it fully covered? Is it mostly covered? Somewhat covered? And by covered, I really mean for any one activity, not just product management, but if somebody else has some accountability to help make that happen. And then in doing so, you keep track of the gaps so that at the end of the discussion, you can actually circle back and say, well, here's the ones that are important. Here's where the gaps are. So let's talk about how we can fill those gaps. And at this point in time, what you're hoping for is that all the vice presidents will buy into this, and that what they'll do is then when the time comes for me to ask for help from their team member in the future, they'll recognize that they'll know what it is, and they, rather than just accepting the fact that it's something else in their day, they'll actually maybe help them make time for it. All right, so then another way to approach it is with what I call a two-step approach, and I actually think this is more effective, but it does take more time. So what I was going to show you on the screen here, and you'll see after the fact, is I created a worksheet in a basically a survey template that you would give to all the kind of key stakeholders in advance, and you'd ask for them to fill it out. It's about 45 questions. But when they do that, the nice thing about it is that two things will happen. One is you'll get all of their feedback as opposed to just the loud person in the room, which is a disadvantage with the one-step process. So you get all their feedback, A. B, you can actually summarize that and bring it into that first meeting with everybody in person, and you've already got the composite scores up on the screen. So now what you're able to do is you're able to just focus on the places that maybe surprise them. So you review the results, find the ones that everybody is surprised by, and focus on those. And the other benefit of this approach is that by even taking the survey and reading what these areas are to answer the question, you're sort of implicitly training them as to what these things are. And trust me, they won't know until they actually read it. Now, the bad news is it does take more time. It's going to take more time for them because they have a survey followed by the discussions. And it's going to take more time for you to organize all of that. I have an example of the template, what that survey looks like here. I'll send it to you after the fact. And another slide that basically shows you how it's kind of summarized automatically for you. So Steve, I think at this point, since there's no visual, it'd be better if I just kind of end it, and let's just open this up for questions. If assuming people could follow the discussion without the visuals.
Yeah, the chat has been pretty quiet. So what I would suggest is,
okay,
let's just unpack a little bit. So you've presented a very powerful system to basically engage the organization around product management. Where have you found the best acceptance of this kind of work, and where do you find the most resistance,
John? Where I find acceptance is when people, excuse me, when people actually see the framework and they realize all the things that you do, and they now have context to know what you're talking about when you talk to them. The resistance, though, is getting them into the room, because generally speaking, if you do it in a wrong way, they'll think that you're actually just coming in to basically complain about how much work you have and that you're asking for their help. That's really not what you're doing. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get a well-oiled machine synchronized around a framework that the whole group can to move forward. So that'd be a resistance point. Another resistance point, I think, is a lot of people tend to be detail-oriented, but some of the executives and other stakeholders just aren't. So getting them to sit down and focus for a full hour, for example, is tough. So what I found is that you really need to make sure that you ideally talk to who they report to, and get them into the room and get some support for the idea before you call them in.
Yeah, you made the comment that if there's that generally anything that the other functions don't want to do, it suddenly winds up on the product management agenda, which I've seen as well. I really appreciated that comment. Have you found as you've worked with organizations to elevate product management into a more strategic role. Have you found one or two points where it's best to get started?
So is your question, how do you actually start to get momentum in a company to get acceptance of and help with product management? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, absolutely. If I were, there's a lot of product managers on the line here. They're wondering how to get started.
Right, exactly. Well, a couple of things. The first one, I think, is really to start the win-loss call process. Without getting everybody's approval necessarily, just get it started. So, work with sales directly, tactfully. Just make sure that you've got a constant flow of win-loss deal information coming to the product managers, and then have the product managers start making those calls. And what I found is that they become so informed about what's really needed, and they're able to put stories behind these things that, as you get into the cross-functional discussions, people start to notice that the product managers really know what they're talking about. I think that's probably one. I think another one that really tends to get the ball moving is most companies have a very difficult time with product roadmaps, especially an ROI-driven product roadmap. So when they see not only an objective, repeatable process for picking priorities, usually they breathe a sigh of relief, because they've been frustrated that all around them, there's a political fighting, there's a loudest voice, there's a big customer that's screaming, there's not really a solid way to start to compare alternatives for development. And once they see that in action, they don't want to go back. I think those are the two biggest things.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the chat?
Here. Those were key points. You also suggested that the loudest voice issue was significant. Where do you tend to see that the most? Does that come out of the sales distribution side of the organization, or the product development and process side of the organization?
I've typically found it in two parts. One is sales, of course, and another one is customer service, or the the customer retention team, for example. Because it's not really their fault. They need to listen to what their customers are asking them, and they want to relay that to you. And in their mind, it is the most urgent thing, because it is to those customers. Right. And then on the customer side, what I've seen happen is very large customers, especially, who have a lot of pull with the company, will make demands for something custom that really could be better solved another way, or that isn't really important for anybody but them. And it's very difficult for them to make that argument to a customer, but those are the friction points. Now, that said, I want to add this, Scott, and that is, what I found, though, is that when I actually talk to those customers myself, and I show them, for example, a high-level strategic roadmap, and I share with them the direction we're going, and I share with them maybe not all the details, but at least give them some comfort that we actually do have a plan, and that some of the things they're looking for fit into the plan, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about things that don't fit into the plan, and then they may not always like it, but they understand it. Yeah. Hopefully that'll help.
We got a question in on the chat, John. Extending on these questions, how do we help organizations empower product managers to take on a more strategic role? We tend to saddle them with a lot of technical work in the middle of the operation.
That's a great question. Obviously, there's a lot of facets to that. First and foremost, though, is give them some training. When I was with Equity Partners, we sent all of our vice presidents and directors of product management to Pragmatic training. So we had a common language to understand value-based approach to pricing, to understand just how to think about a market-driven organization. That's one. But secondly, I think, is to also use this framework. Like I have my framework, they have their framework. There's lots of good frameworks out there, but just choose one and start to use that as a center of your conversations on a continuous basis, and explain to them why spending time on some of these strategic things is so beneficial to the company, and then eventually, if they, they'll see it too. But then at the same time, you need to make them aware that this is bigger than one person. It requires help from others, and you got to have their support. And so, for example, the first thing that usually I try to get off a product manager's plate is being pulled into product demos for sales. Well, it just isn't scalable. You got to have a resource to do that on your behalf. You can maybe train them once, but then that's about it. Excellent. I think we're about out of time, aren't we, Scott?
Yeah, we need to bring it in for a landing here, John. Do you want to share your contact info and then see everybody at 10 a.m. tomorrow?
Yeah, if you look in the chat window, I have my email address up there. Feel free to just email me, and what I'll send to you is this presentation that you never saw, as well as the spreadsheet templates that hopefully save you a lot of time if you want to go out and do this yourself. So thank you for sitting through this technical challenge.
Oh, you've done very well, John. Thank you. Appreciate it. And you've got a couple of good comments in the chat to build on as well. So be well.